that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wonder how gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is a special edition of Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Fennell, and we have Sonia Silbert over here, and we have Abby Mnookin, and they are from 350 Vermont. And is that also there's a local 350 Brattleboro?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, and I'm going to let them run the show. I'm just sitting here. So if you want to tell us what you're all about, you can do that.
Great. Thanks for having us on this show.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, my name is Abby Mnookin, as George said, and it's great to be here. I am, my official title is the coordinator of Mother Up, Families Rise Up for Climate Action, which is the program of 350 Vermont that works to bring parents and families into the movement for climate justice. And we have information here for people to find out about our monthly meetups that happen at Kids Place on fourth Mondays from 5:30 to 7:30.
Now, Kids Place is right next to the hotel pharmacy, isn't it?
It's right below, yeah, so next to and below. So we chose that location as another way to engage with families because it will attract the kids, and the kids will then tell their parents that they want to go. So we really target especially parents of young children, but we're open to all parents and families, and we provide a meal and childcare and try to reduce barriers for participation for families to be more engaged and really try to amplify those voices in the movement. And just to start off with this, the term Mother Up, our name, is really trying to get at mothering the earth, not just for mothers. So it could even be all people, not necessarily parents, but the idea that we need to really protect and nurture and care for our earth as one solution to the climate crisis. And so the roots of that actually trace back to a phrase, Warrior Up, which was Amy George, Chief Reuben George's mother, who's a First Nations family out on the other side of the country, used that term in the battle, in one of the first battles for to resist the Keystone Pipeline expansion. And so that term morphed into Mother Up with Rising Tide, and then we got permission to use it as like a solidarity term. So we hope that all parents and families engage, and fourth Mondays at Kids Place.
Great.
And I also work with Sonia in the trainings part of 350. Maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Sure. So I'm Sonia Silbert, and I'm the trainings coordinator at 350 Vermont. And we do a lot of work in Brattleboro, but we're actually a statewide organization that is affiliated with the global organization 350.org. And so my role is really to do trainings and facilitation and political education around the state. And so that, and Abby's one of our facilitators. We have a few other facilitators who work with us a lot. So we really are striving for like a leaderful movement, meaning that we really want to invest in the people who are part of our campaigns, and particularly with younger folks, and give them the skills and analysis to really take the movement to the next level. So we do trainings on campaign strategy, on nonviolent direct action, on the connections between racial justice and climate justice, and many more. We both of our works kind of support the ongoing campaigns that we have at 350 that are, the folks that work on them more directly are based in Burlington and Montpelier, but our organization has two main campaigns going right now. One is the extreme energy campaign to try and stop fossil fuel infrastructure and fossil fuel expansion in the state. And one is the solutions campaign that is trying to find alternative solutions. And right now that's really working on regenerative agriculture.
Regenerative agriculture.
Yeah. And,
Interesting.
And having folks start regenerative agriculture projects in their hometowns and communities around the state.
I have, I write for Green Energy Times, and one of the things that I just did yesterday was to write an article about a community project in New York State. But the person I interviewed, we were talking about a co-location of solar panels with agriculture, and there's been a lot of work done with that.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. And the Fraunhofer Institute, in particular, they did a bunch of experiments, and they found, and this was actually done elsewhere, potatoes. When you put potatoes under solar panels, you can increase the crop.
Huh.
It's really...
This is a new movement that's really going to grow. I mean, it's just so logical.
Yeah.
It
You
is.
can't grow everything under solar panels,
Yeah.
but you can grow most vegetables.
And
Potatoes, tomatoes,
Yeah.
not going to grow corn.
no, not corn. But they, the Fraunhofer Institute did a thing where they were growing hay under solar panels, and they were harvesting it with standard
Regular
agricultural
equipment.
equipment. And there's just a lot going on with that.
It's
But-
like they're doubling their income.
Yeah, they're doubling their income. It's all. We're in a world that is different than it used to be. But tell me more, please.
And then to piggyback off of that, also our local group, 350 Brattleboro. So we're all connected, and 350 Brattleboro is basically like a local chapter of 350 Vermont.
Right.
And we meet regularly. The leadership team meets on first Wednesdays, and then open to the public on third Wednesdays. And those meetings are usually at the Brattleboro Food Co-op Community Room from 6 to 8 p.m. And we work on a variety of local, state, and kind of like global issues depending on what's going on. So we often plug into campaigns that 350 Vermont is spearheading, but then sometimes, like this past, we'll probably get into this more, but on September 20th, when there was this big global climate rally, a call for climate strikes and rallies around the world. We had one here in Brattleboro, and so we were in touch with organizers throughout the state about that, and then had a big local event. So 350 Brattleboro is a great way to plug in for folks in and around Brattleboro and Windham County.
Good. When you said, Sonia, that you were talking to young people, what kind of age groups are you talking about?
Well, it really varies. We end up working a lot with college-age students, particularly folks who have gotten involved in Sunrise, because they've done a lot of great organizing on college campuses right now. But we've also been doing a fair amount of work with high school-age students, and some even younger. But I'd say mostly high school and college-aged youth have been really integral to a lot of our recent actions, including the global climate strike that we did a lot of organizing for in September, including the Next Steps Climate Walk that we organized in April. And there's ongoing work asking them to take leadership in some of our campaigns, but a lot of it is supporting the work that they're doing and offering resources.
It's interesting to me to see people like Greta Thunberg and the various kids in various parts of the country who have gone to court, suing the United States, now suing Canada, suing Germany, whatever it is, whatever country. Really interesting to see that. And one of the things that Tom and I have been talking about with this for, I don't know, when did we start talking about young people? Probably years ago.
At least two.
When you were young.
When we were young.
Well, they're the people who are going to be living with the results.
Well, everybody is already living with the results. I was appalled when I saw the parts of California that are in high-risk
Serious
fire thing. 40% of California is now in a high-risk zone. And we're seeing people being hurt, we're seeing property damaged, we're seeing in some cases people dying, and we've got a government that's basically saying this isn't happening.
And there's wealthy people in California who are literally hiring their own fire protection. And once again, we're seeing how climate change impacts different people differently,
Yes.
depending on how much power they have.
Yes,
They're
absolutely.
figuring out how to keep themselves safe.
Yes.
Even though, of all things, wildfires is a very community. It affects everyone in the community. It's pretty hard to keep one house safe and not the others.
Although I
But
saw,
if you've got the resources, you're going to try.
I saw an article in the news today, the Reagan Library. Did you see that? The Reagan Library was saved by goats.
It takes all.
They hired 500 goats
Wow.
to cut down the brush around the library, and you know, but
You do a good job.
Creative solutions. This should be available to all.
I also saw someone who said something about the Reagan Library that, don't worry, we're just going to spray water over here on those fires and it's going to trickle down to save the library.
Trickle down.
Trickle down.
Yeah, touche.
You know, the county in the United States that had the highest percentage of pro-Trump voters was, what is that county called, Tom?
I'm not sure.
Cameron Parish.
Huh?
Cameron Parish.
In Louisiana?
Louisiana.
Okay.
Cameron Parish, Louisiana had over 80% pro-Trump vote. And they have been told, the people in that county, by the conservative Republican government of Louisiana, that they've got 25 years to leave. They have to move out because the sea is rising. And the same thing has happened all across the coast of Louisiana. The land is subsiding too because the oil is being pumped out from under it. But I mean, this is a bad.
You know, we've been following what's going on in Louisiana on the shelves
Yeah.
for several years.
Yeah.
And people, they move, and a couple of years later they got to
They
move
move again. That's right. And everybody who's in the area of New Orleans who is outside the levee system is going to have to move. These are real problems, and the kids that we have around us are getting more and more aware of the fact that their futures are in desperate trouble. But there's a good side to this too. At least there's something good that you can say to them. Climate change represents the biggest opportunity for business and employment that has ever happened to human beings. They can do something about it, and they can get good jobs doing that. You know, it's a time when people can get excited about, if you want to put it this way, fighting a war with no enemy.
Yeah,
Abby,
there's
tell-
so many things to say. Okay, let me back up a little bit and then respond to that. But one
Okay.
thing is, so one of the phrases that we use a lot in this movement is our frontline communities. And so what that means are communities that are on, which is actually, probably it goes back to military language for that as well, but communities on the front lines of the impacts of climate change. And so oftentimes what we see is those communities have contributed some of the least to what the causes of climate change, the burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, some of the top causes, and yet they're bearing the greatest impacts. So, coastal communities that we're talking about, island nations, people of color are more are impacted at higher levels. And in Vermont, one of the ways that we also see that playing out is that youth are on the front lines because,
Absolutely.
again, they're the younger generations.
Yeah.
They've contributed the least in terms of having fewer years to contribute, and yet they're going to bear greater
facing it.
burdens because older people will die and they will be receiving. They'll be on the receiving end of more extreme weather and. So for some people in Vermont, there's some discussion like, well, we don't really have frontline communities in the same way, and we push back on that in a number of ways. There are lots of examples of that. Here in 2011, when we suffered from Tropical Storm Irene, we saw that people were disproportionately impacted of that, and that often mobile home communities that were really low-lying or in and around Brattleboro were impacted
Mobile
more
home?
heavily.
communities, they don't even have to be low-lying.
Just in
Mobile
general.
home communities are the ones that get blown over. You know, that their homes get blown over in high winds, and you know, this is it's a reality, and it's a reality not just here, but everywhere where you've got mobile homes.
Exactly. So impacts are disproportionate. So that's something that we just like move into this conversation stating as factual, like all people are affected by climate change, and those impacts are disproportionate. And so the justice side of the work that we try to do with 350 Vermont is to address the needs of frontline communities and those who are suffering those disproportionate impacts. And how can we come up with solutions that are not going to be at further expense of people on the front lines? And so, what can we do to help lift people, to help lift more people up, and amplify those voices and center those concerns? And that's really where the justice side of climate work comes into play. Is like acknowledging that and then working to counter it. Going back to the war analogy, so 350.org was founded by Bill McKibben, who's a big name in this movement, and a group of college students, actually at Middlebury College here in Vermont. So it's now this global network of grassroots climate organizing all over the world, but it does have its roots here in Vermont, which is exciting. And Bill McKibben himself has often used this language of, you know, we need to fight climate change like we're at war, and we need to mobilize like that, and that's really the only way that we're going to win this. But those of us who work within 350 Vermont and others throughout the climate movement, not just in 350, but all around, have pushed back on that, and receiving some leadership from like indigenous communities like we were talking about, which is that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So a lot of what got us into this crisis is this, the military-industrial complex.
But the military are the ones who are pushing hard at the federal level to acknowledge that climate change is happening.
Yeah,
it's really surprising.
So, and
They
there
also
are
use more. The U.S. military also uses more fossil fuels than like most countries in the
but
whole world.
Yeah, but they want to stop doing that, and for good reason.
and they're
But I'm sorry, Abby, go ahead.
there was recently just an article released about how different the U.S. military will have to look in just decades. We're not talking centuries here. Maybe as years, but decades at
Immediately,
at a maximum.
as a matter of fact,
Yeah.
because some of their equipment is getting obsolete. Docks, this is an Army, it's Navy, but docks are no longer accessible to some ships because the ocean level has risen, and so they've got that problem. But go ahead.
Yeah. So we're so this is trying to get at the root causes of the climate crisis is a very different kind of thing, and it takes it's messy, and it has to be a long, we have to be looking at the long view and not just the short term. And so that can feel slower moving, and there is this sense of urgency, like we have to act now, and we have to be big and bold and fast. And but some of the root causes of the climate crisis include capitalism and colonization and white supremacy and some of the the thinking behind patriarchy, and all of those together have gotten us into this crisis. And so using first of all remaining within those systems and trying to address the climate crisis is going to be continually bumping up against some of those root causes, and using language like we have to fight this, we have to stop it, we have to we're at war with the climate is, in my belief, is kind of self-defeating and doesn't and misses the point in a lot of ways. And so
I understand what you're
reframe
saying.
That.
I want to make a not a counterpoint, because I'm not disagreeing with what you've said, but there are things that can happen when you're on a military basis that would not normally happen, and most people in this country have completely forgotten this. But in 1942, the United States government went to the automotive industry and said, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to sell cars anymore, they weren't even, as I understand it, allowed to sell cars they had on their dealers' lots. They all had to go to the government for government use because all of the automotive industry had to be used for some other purpose. Guide lamp division of General Motors all of a sudden was manufacturing pistols. These were things that happened because of a military type of approach. And I don't think we should be manufacturing pellet pistols or even telling people that they can't. Well, I don't know, maybe they shouldn't have cars. But this is, a situation in which the government can look back and say, look, we did this before. We're going to do something like it again. You're not allowed to manufacture internal combustion engines. And that would make a huge difference. You're not allowed to build new gas-burning power plants. We don't have any coal-burning power plants under construction in this country, and we haven't for years. But we're going to close down all of the coal plants. We're going to close down all of the gas plants as fast as we can replace them. And the thing that people don't know about this is, what was it? Elizabeth Warren wanted to spend $1 trillion a year. Mm-hmm. She had picked up Jay Inslee's approach. If we do that, it's going to save us $1 trillion a year in medical expenses. Mm-hmm. This is, it's mind-boggling, but
it's not just an expenditure.
Yeah,
right.
That's right. And it's going to save us money on our it's going to save us money on our cars. It's going to save us money on our heat. It's going to save us money on our electricity. Somebody's standing in the way of that. And, you were talking about capitalism. That's the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and war, and even just the language of war is, huge mobilizer. So there are reasons why that's being used.
Yeah.
But I think some of the pushback against that language is really like a shift in mindset. And
you need a shift in mindset to be able to approach this.
Right, exactly.
You can't just take the cutout dolls that we've had in the past and apply them to the picture and say that's what it's going to look like.
Right. But this could be a good transition. Talking about Bo, you could talk a little bit about.
We could do that
because there is definitely some examples of how the military-industrial complex played a role in that, and also with coal. You were talking about coal and the role that it's still playing here in New England, which I think many people don't know about, and it's not as visible here in Vermont. We don't have coal facilities, but New Hampshire is not far away. So,
if you don't mind my saying this, you know where the phrase military-industrial complex came from?
No.
You don't?
Well, do I?
We were warned, our country was warned
Eisenhower.
against the military-industrial complex
By
by President Eisenhower, who happened to have been a five-star general.
I think the only president we've had since then who actually had served in the military, and he was the one who was like, "Don't go down this route."
Yeah.
Actually, a number of them did.
No, since then, I don't think.
Yeah, Jimmy Carter did.
Okay.
Well, Kennedy did.
Kennedy did.
I guess
Lyndon Johnson did.
Great. Never mind.
Although
take it back.
Lyndon Johnson was kind of I don't know what he was in the military, but he wasn't much. John Kennedy, well, we shouldn't be talking about these.
So
we
we'll
should
go.
be talking
Yeah,
about
Sonia
Bo.
can provide a bit of background, and I can provide a little bit of my story.
Okay, why don't I get the slideshow going?
Before he does, or while he's trying to do that, why don't you tell us why is it 350 and not 250?
Oh, yeah.
450?
Yeah, that is a good question. Yeah. I just talked about this earlier. So, and we were talking about who do we work with in terms of youth. So just to tie some of these strands together, Sonia and I have been leading workshops locally, and we visited Brattleboro Union High School, BUHS here, and took part in the Diversity Day that they sponsor a few times a year, and we led a workshop in climate justice in the 4 Rs, which I think we'll also touch on later. But so we do a little bit of this background for them as well, because it's not necessarily well known where this number comes from. So 350 refers to parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And so for most of human history, really up until the Industrial Revolution, 150 some odd years ago, their parts per million was very stable at around 280 parts per million. And then with the Industrial Revolution and this influx in the burning of fossil fuels, we saw a pretty dramatic rise that's continued since then, and we're now over 410 parts per million. And 350 was chosen because scientists, the vast majority of scientists, agree that that is the highest, safest level of carbon dioxide for life on Earth to continue as we know it today.
So it's a safe level.
It's a safe level. So it's still like higher than it has been for most of human history, but
Higher than it should be.
and even higher than people might argue it should be. But it's considered the highest of the safer levels. And so, again, we've already surpassed that. So now it's not a matter of like, how can we stay where we are, but it's a matter of how can we draw down, which is a term that's become more popular recently with this, the book and movie that's come out.
I gave
Drawdown.
that to my granddaughter. She was thrilled.
Yeah, it has a lot
Yeah.
Oh, great.
of, so global solutions.
People are
and-
looking for solutions.
Yeah, it's
They are.
nice to see them like listed very concretely. So drawdown is a term that's used because we have to now actually figure out ways to store and sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, and get back return to 350. So a lot of like in the logo, a lot of the times the 3 will come with an arrow backwards to symbolize that we got to move back in that direction.
My understanding is that 350 parts per million was the maximum that you could have without a danger of feedback loops. And we are seeing feedback loops, and they are serious.
Yeah.
And the people
Not
who
good
are
stuff.
sitting back saying, this isn't happening, or let's wait,
Don't understand
don't
science.
understand. The Gulf Stream
Yeah.
has slowed down by 15%.
Yeah, no, I mean that's in every facet of really all biomes, ecosystems, around the world, ocean currents, air currents.
I was reading about how the Russians are so upset because they suddenly realized that this was dangerous. And the thing that made them realize that it was dangerous was that they had sinkholes appearing all over Siberia, some of which were like 300 yards across, and they realized that they have cities out there that are built on ice and they're just going to collapse. So what do you do about that? But it's not just that. It's what do we do about the people who live in Florida who are going to have to leave. Because they are. Because, in Miami, for example, the people who were living along the shore have decided to move to Little Haiti because it's 7 feet higher.
Right.
Really. I mean, and what are they doing there? They're displacing the rather poor people who are having to move to other parts of the country. This is the beginning of a migration.
Yeah, climate migration.
I don't think it's the beginning. I think we're in the midst of it.
We are.
Right?
There's
We've
no
had
question.
a migration crisis at our border, and particularly Africa up towards Europe and across
Oh,
the
yeah,
Mediterranean.
it's-
That so much of that is fueled by the climate crisis, and or by wars that are impacted by the climate crisis.
Right.
And it's going to get worse. And I think we have some choices about what to do with it. We're obviously seeing a choice right now that our federal government is making, which is a hard line. This is our border, and we're going to put you all in jail for even attempting to come here.
And
I
your
think it's
Or
kids.
in concentration camps.
Yeah, and your
And we're going to
kids.
separate you from your kids. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
really horrific things. And that's one way to deal with this, but we know it's going to be more and more of a crisis. And ideally, we need to change the way we're doing it and have a much more humanitarian bent to it, and much more understanding that we in the U.S. are one of the biggest causes of this crisis, and we actually have to take some responsibility for dealing with the impacts as well as stopping it.
Well, I tell people who are worried about immigration 2 things. One of them, which is the more recent thing, is if you want to stop immigration, if that's really what you want to do, and I'm not so sure it's a good idea, but the best way to stop it is to put people into a position where they really have a great life where they are and they don't have any reason to go anywhere else. The other thing is, the thing that made this country great to begin with was a combination of 2 things, one of which was the huge fertile land that we're destroying, and the second thing is the people who came to this country who were poor. who wanted to do better. And, you know, there's a point at which saying those people aren't allowed here anymore is kind of like saying we're going to play games with finance and that's how we're going to make our money. Sooner or later, it's not going to work. And unfortunately for us, I think it's sooner. It's now.
And I think all of this also is a good reminder that these conversations should really start with an acknowledgement that we live on stolen land. So we talk about like this fertile land and people who came here, you know, most people are immigrants of some kind, and this land that we're on, it was stolen, and there are still Native, Abenaki, and other tribal people who continue to live here, and that there also have to be ways that that's acknowledged and addressed, and that we figure out ways to move forward with that knowledge.
I was kind of thrilled when I discovered that a woman that I deal with on a regular basis is a fluent Mi'kmaq speaker.
Yeah.
But, you know,
That's rare.
Abby, look at
Yeah.
me. What color is my
Yeah,
skin?
yeah.
What color
I would
is
say
my
white
skin?
presenting.
I would say
but-
pink.
Okay.
And
Pink
yet,
presenting.
I have ancestors who are American Indians, and I have ancestors who are black from Africa. You know, this is what the DNA says. And you know what? If a person's, you know, not second generation American from, you know, Poles or something like that, and even if they are, but if the family's been in this country for more than a few generations, there's a pretty good chance that there's a mixture going on there because that happened. And I think it was my father's grandmother. Everybody said, well, she's part American Indian, because they wanted to conceal the fact that she was part African. You see, but that's and you know the story is you take an old family and you scratch the surface and they've got relatives in Africa.
Yeah.
You know, and or in North America, and you can't this business of racism doesn't even, there's no logic behind it. It doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, it's not scientifically based.
But who cares? You know, science is a Chinese hoax.
Whoa, we can go off on a
This is-
lot of
I know.
tangents right now.
And then, so the racial justice, the interconnections between racial justice and climate justice is one of the workshops that Sonia
That's
talked about.
interesting,
But just that's really, you know, that the root causes are the same. And so if we're going to address one, we can't do that without addressing both.
I also think, just to kind of go back to, like, I don't know, I think the phrase of, like, what made our country great, I think is a little twitchy right now in particular, given that it's Trump's slogan. But I think there's also something to acknowledge that our country, I don't know if you could call it great if you want, but I would say what our country actually has been is like an economic powerhouse. And I think the reasons for that has been fertile soil, poor people, and a few other things. But really, from like the moment Europeans and white folks came to this area on the east coast of what's now the U.S., people have looked at Earth here as something to extract, as resources that were there to
Absolutely.
be taken, and that got us as Americans, as the U.S., really, really far in terms of stability, in terms of power, global power, in terms of quality of life. And I think that that understanding of, we're coming here and this earth is for our taking, we can cut down all of these old growth trees and not deal with the consequences, I think it's catching up with us now. And so that kind of, the mentality we're dealing with now is not new. It actually has been
Yes,
part
I
of the
absolutely
founding
agree.
of this country.
I absolutely agree. When I was a little kid, and we had a house in Winchester, and we had a beautiful view. And down in the view was the gravel pit. You couldn't see the gravel pit because for the trees, but the gravel pit in Bernardston, where there was a cement kiln. And when the cement kiln was running, you could see this little thing of smoke coming up from it. And I remember saying to my Aunt Ruth, my grandmother's sister, that, you know, I felt bad about the fact that was there. I wish it wasn't there. And she said, haven't you ever heard of the smell of progress? Seriously.
Yeah.
And that's what people thought. And
And it was progress down a very specific path.
it was
Yeah.
with you know, very specific goals which were promulgated by a woman who was talking about objectivism, which is not the same as objectivity. It's objectivity applied to the very subjective idea that wealth is what it's all about. And, you know, we have a...
I was just realizing, oh no, that is the beginning. I was thinking we jumped ahead in the slides, but...
It happens sometimes. Anyway, I'm sorry. We were going to talk about Bo.
We should talk about Bo.
Let's talk
It'll
about
connect
Bo.
some more dots, yeah.
Yeah, it'll connect some more dots. I want to just double check that this is, yes, that is the first slide. And we could have that put up on the screen for people so that they can see it and tell us about it.
Yeah, so the slides start at the legal rally and then move from there. So you could maybe talk about a little bit of the planning and then I'll talk
sure.
about...
So, kind of connected to all that we've been talking about, there's one remaining large coal facility left in New England that does burn coal and doesn't have a shutdown date. And it's in New Hampshire. It's about an hour and a half east of Brattleboro by car.
Mm-hmm.
And it's huge. It's kind of like a little city with giant mountains of coal. And there's been a lot of efforts to try to shut it down, to say that we should not have coal burning in our region. We should not be supporting the extractive industry in Appalachia that is getting the coal out. We should not be supporting the route that the coal is taking up here that is often doing some kind of pollution along the way, and we definitely shouldn't be burning it here in our region. That we need to come up with other ways to support to have the energy that we need. So 350 Vermont, along with 350 New Hampshire and a few other groups, kind of spearheaded by a group called the Climate Disobedience Center, got together.
Good name, right?
Yes,
Yeah, good
Very
name.
clear.
In September, as part of this global climate strike week of actions, actions were happening all over the country. This was the regional action here. So hundreds of folks came to the gates of the coal facility in New Hampshire, and we had a big rally there. And about 70 folks or so, dressed in Tyvek suits. Check out that red hair. There's Abby, looking stylish
happened-
with
With the buckets.
We had a picture as this was happening on our show, and the comment that we made was that the people all looked like a bunch of druids.
Yeah.
And
It
the
was-
contrast will be even
Yeah.
more stark, but
So they're all wearing Tyvek suits because they're really going into an industrial spot. And they brought in buckets, and the idea was to risk arrest to go into the plant. This is one of the entrances of the plant. And risk arrest and commit civil disobedience and try to take some of the coal out. Fill the buckets with coal and take that and say, this coal that we're taking out will never be burned. And this coal plant will be shut down even if we have to do it bucket by bucket. And it was really beautiful. It was really powerful. And it was met with so much police intensity. Abby was one of the people who went in and risked arrest. Do you want to kind of talk about what's going on here?
sure, yeah. So those earlier pictures were leading up to it with the legal part of the rally, and some hundreds of people remained on the legal side of things, remaining outside of the gates of the coal facility. And then approximately 70 of us went to the other side and passed the barriers. But so there were three main goals of this action. One of them was to build power and unity within the movement. And so I think pictures like this are examples of that, where Emma from the Climate Disobedience Center is in the middle, and she's talking about basically choices we have and whether or not we want to move forward together. And we were all giving our thumbs up, like we're in this together. We're here with you. And so building power and unity felt really successful. The second one was also to reshape our own relationship to risk, and also how others may perceive risk in the climate movement, what it looks like, and how we might engage differently with risk. And then the third one was to get some coal. So we achieved our first two goals. We didn't achieve our third one, but we actually thought the morning of the action that was pretty unlikely, because we had some scouts who went out earlier in the morning to just get a lay of the land and to find out what it looked like from the security end of things. And every report that they sent back to us was just, more and more and more law enforcement from all different facets of both locally and beyond were coming in. So we had the private security from Merrimack coal facility. There were local local police from Bow. There was the Merrimack County Sheriff's Department. There was New Hampshire State Police, which we'll see soon. And then there was federal, both Fish and Game and Department of Homeland Security. And
Well, they
so
weren't playing
those
around, were they?
those law enforcement agencies came on foot, by boat, on ATV, on marked police cars, unmarked police cars, and there was a helicopter and
an armored tank.
And an arm, which I guess I didn't see that, so I forgot that
I only
part.
saw it after everyone else, all the arrestees had been driven away. They came out. They had an armored tank in there.
So this was,
I don't know what they were expecting from us.
Yeah, I mean, so this was, pre-planned and very well publicized ahead of time action, where we told everyone what we were doing. We even told them, we basically told them the date, the time, what was going to happen, who's going to be there. So the reason for this was to say, we
publicized
actually,
our commitment to nonviolence.
Yeah, exactly. So to say, this is who we are, what we stand for, what we're planning to do. We wanted media there, and we wanted to be well covered, but we were very clear on what was happening. And it was met with such extreme militarized force. It was really intense. So this
There
was,
they are, the stormtroopers.
These were
Compared to the white Tyvek suits.
which so
This
we
is
laugh.
America.
I mean, we laugh about
This is
this.
Bow,
used
New
to happen.
Hampshire.
This is Bow, New Hampshire. Yeah.
Wow.
This happened. There were organizations like this during. I mean, they weren't dressed like that, but
That's what I meant.
during the time when any time between 1873 and 1968, you had. I mean, think about Kent State, for crying out loud. You had that.
Yeah.
I remember seeing a picture of a couple of National Guardsmen who were at a barricade that had a sign on it that said "Turn left or get shot." And some woman came and she wanted to do something other than turn left, so they shot her. And that was, that was reality. And here.
Yeah, it's terrifying, and that's that's a very clear message that they're sending, and a way to evoke fear among people both who are already involved and those who might think about getting involved. Just to say, stay away. We mean business. You should not take part in this.
Could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Would you rather face a group like this, or would you rather face the future that we're going to have if we don't deal with this?
Well, you're asking someone who chose this, so this is what I chose.
Okay.
But so it's really a terrifying choice. But so I think we can kind of laugh about it now, look at them, the stormtrooper comparison, and luckily they didn't meet us with actual physical violence.
Yeah.
But in the moment, we didn't know that. So I was part of the second group of people. So the first band of people to get arrested crossed a concrete barrier, and the law enforcement said, if you cross this barrier, you will get arrested. So the number of law enforcement that were there arrested that number of people, and those of us who weren't being arrested chose to just pass them by and keep going. And so we were like, okay, we're going to keep going. We outnumber you. In that moment. But then, so we kept walking to approach the coal facility, and we were able to see the pile of coal. We didn't quite get there, but we were making our plans in terms of how to proceed. And then we saw this line of New Hampshire State Police in full riot gear coming towards us. And that was, for me, the most terrifying moment, because I also traveled to Standing Rock in November of 2016.
Did you see the news about Keystone today?
Today.
There was a leak.
Oh, I did see that.
385,000 gallons of oil.
It was predicted.
Right, which is all.
Well, it wasn't Keystone XL. It was Keystone 1.
Right.
So it's an old pipeline, or older pipeline, I should say. But we have a picture that's going to be in our show next week, and it shows farmland that is just grassland, really, and it has a big puddle of oil on it. And it was supplied by the owner of the pipeline. And this is something that we're going to talk about is, yeah, this doesn't look all that bad, but bear in mind, the people who supplied this photograph had a reason to want to supply the most benign-looking photograph they possibly could. But nevertheless,
not a trusted news source. This was my first arrest in a civil disobedience for climate-related work, and I had traveled to Standing Rock in November of 2016, but I did not risk arrest while I was there. But we actually arrived on the night of one of the most intense acts of violence towards the water protectors and the people who were in the camps. And so when I arrived, there were people being shuttled back in, suffering from pepper spray and tear gas and water cannons, and
Ouch.
and injuries
water
from
cannons can really do damage to people.
People were hospitalized, and one person lost part of their arm. There became an amputee in their arm.
Gosh.
It was really extreme, and so that was. That's still, a memory for me. While I wasn't on the front lines there, I was in the camps as people were coming in, suffering these injuries and getting treated. And so when I saw these police walking towards us, I had no idea what their response was going to be. I mean, anytime you have people who have the number of weapons that they had on hand, it's just like one wrong move, and then things just go, it's
kind of
really
thing does
scary.
happen every once in a
Totally.
while.
I mean, they think you're that, and that's one reason why we actually decided not to bring shovels when we went in, because we didn't want
mistaken for
a
something
weapon.
else.
So we
had
brought our
a friend
buckets.
who showed up for Kennedy's funeral in a car that had 2 umbrellas in the back seat, and he got taken by the FBI because somebody reported that there were shotguns.
Yeah, it's really scary. That was the moment for me in which I felt the most scared. And yet, like I said, and we'll just end on a brighter note.
The Druids.
So building that power and unity, had I been alone, I would have been terrified and paralyzed with fear. But in this group, we chose to stand together in a circle. We stopped walking. We stood together in a circle. We started singing songs together. We held hands or linked elbows, and just really felt that power of our group and the solidarity. And we knew were it to come to physical violence at all, we were clearly not going to win. But just in that moment, it felt like such a clear, we were sending such a clear message, and it really did feel super empowering to be with this group of people, to be making that choice, and to stand up to that to some degree. And luckily, even though they were highly militarized, they didn't meet us with force. So we were arrested, so that's a forceful act. I mean, it's not like it was all peaceful. We were handcuffed. We were taken to the county jail and processed. And I wouldn't say that it was all very peaceful in that sense, but they didn't meet us with violence. And so, but it was clearly a message that they were sending to us, we mean business. Please don't come back. We have, more where this came from. But there are plans for future actions. We don't have dates that are being publicized at this point, but it's not just going to be this one action and then the coal facility decides, okay, we're going to shut down next week. You did such a good job.
But the coal facilities are in serious trouble.
Yeah, well, one of the fears that we have, and so if you want to learn more about this campaign, by the way, this is the shirt that was made by an artist, No Coal, No Gas. And if you go to nocoalnogas.org, you can find out all the details and sign a pledge of resistance. But one of the main reasons why this plant is also being targeted, the gas side of things, is that there's reason to believe that they're keeping it online so that it can someday be converted into a natural gas compressor station or some other processing facility for gas. And so even though coal may be on its way out, like, we want this shut down and offline and not possibly going to be, converted into another equally destructive, if not even more so because of methane, natural gas facility.
A lot of scientists say that methane, natural gas, especially with fracking, is as bad as coal.
Right.
It's just
packaged differently.
Packaged differently.
Yeah,
It doesn't produce as much carbon dioxide,
right,
but it poisons the atmosphere with methane.
Yeah.
It's just a complete mess.
Yeah.
And, again, the fact is, looking at this for years, as I have been doing, and I've been analyzing this stuff since 2011, so it's been over 8 years. I long ago came to the conclusion that we don't need fossil fuels for anything. And one of the things that I love putting up at our show, we had it yesterday. I remember reading a couple of years ago, well, we're never going to be able to replace fossil fuels for aviation. And
guess what?
Guess what? They're doing exactly that. And one of the things that we've actually had it up 3 times over the years. An organization called Harbor Air, which is seaplanes operating out of Vancouver. They have 40 planes, and they're converting all of them to run on electric. They have really long extension cords.
Wow.
And all of the commuter aircraft in Norway is going to be electric. And this is just the beginning. It's kind of like the cars. And what's the biggest car company in the United States? Well, it depends on how you measure it. But if you measure it by market capitalization, which is the value of all the stock, it's Tesla. And this is where we're going.
And it also, I think it's also important to recognize that there have to be some changes also in just lifestyles and behaviors, not on an individual level, but like collectively, societally.
Absolutely. No
because
question
it
about
can't
it.
just be like, well, we want to continue having an equal number of
loud cars.
Plane trips or like drive as many miles as we're used to. We'll just use a different fuel source. But it's also like, how can we change the way that we get around and what
we've got
what we've
drilled
become
into us.
accustomed to, and just our whole our lives of convenience, and how is that going to shift?
We've got it drilled into us that we have to have a car, we have to travel by plane. When I lived in New Hampshire, I was living in Winchester, New Hampshire, and working in Washington, D.C. So I would go to Washington, D.C., spend a month, come back for a weekend, and then go back to Washington, D.C. And I never went down by plane because going down by plane, if you count my son's time taking me to the airport, picking me up at the airport, and so forth, my time at the airport, my time in the air, my time getting from the airport to the hotel, and the rest of the stuff, it turns out that you've got almost exactly the same amount of time chewed up in that as just going from Brattleboro by train to Washington, D.C.
Which is a lovely ride.
It's a lovely ride, except for where all the graffiti is in Connecticut. And it's...
And it needs to be more affordable and public acceptable.
But it's more affordable than air.
And
We've got tracks that go to Boston. Why don't we have a train that goes to Boston?
Yeah.
And there's David Blittersdorf has got his thing going of trying to get trains going in Vermont, but I haven't heard much about where that's gone. But.
And there's a new route now, Greenfield to New York, that's I think more frequent and faster.
Yeah, it happens like a few times in the morning rush hour and the evening rush hour.
Oh, really?
From Greenfield.
From Greenfield.
Wow.
I would love just one more train a day from here to Burlington and be able to do that as a commute. Or
Do
at
it in
least
the same day.
Do it in the same day, or at least just have to spend one night there.
Right.
There isn't the political will to build a public transportation system in the state right now, and one of the things 350 Brattleboro works on a lot is actually bicycle infrastructure and having biking be something that's more prevalent in Brattleboro, which is totally doable here. Like there are things that we can do in our state to make our lifestyles able to change a little bit more and make us less dependent
People
on fossil
should think
fuels.
about how costly it is to have a car.
Oh my man.
I mean, if you had, this is something that I figured out, probably around 1990. I was working 3 miles from where I lived. And, I thought I could walk 3 miles. And then I looked at how much money I could save by doing that. And it was like getting a $5,000 a year raise. It's just
Plus you get some
incredible.
exercise.
Plus you get exercise. And the place I was living was practically on the shore, and the place where I was working was practically on the shore, and I was walking by blue herons and, just all kinds of things.
As opposed to being stuck in traffic.
As opposed to being stuck in traffic, that's right. But people should be thinking about that. And one of the things that I have brought up over and over and over and over again, 3 years ago or so, the American Lung Association in California did a study of 10 states. All of the states in the Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the Northeast, but 3 others that I think in the West Coast states, to see what would happen for people's health if we just stopped driving cars and started internal combustion cars and started, doing our transportation by electric or by pedal or whatever. And they determined that the cost of pollution from cars in Vermont, or pollution from transportation, let me be more accurate. The cost of pollution from transportation in Vermont is $330 million a year, which is approximately $480 per person. Okay, that's a little over 40% of our fuel. That means we're spending probably $1,000 a year per person on medical expenses resulting from coal, gas, and oil. So, does this tell anybody anything? You got a family of 5, it's costing you $5,000 a year. Some people don't believe it, but a lot of this comes out of insurance. Most of it comes out of insurance and taxes. And so it's all concealed. And I'm not happy about the fact that people don't know, but I would be less happy if people had to pay for it themselves, because you'd have people going broke all over the state. 300 people a year die in Vermont, almost one a day, because of our use of fossil fuels. And that's just the medical, side of thing. This is an extremely expensive addiction we've got, and we've got the cure.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things, I talking to kids, you've got an opportunity here to do something great. You can go out there and be one of the people who solves this problem. Be a scientist, be a teacher, be a farmer, be a whatever, but be at the leading edge of this thing of drawing down the carbon, developing the science, and it just looks to me like an exciting time to live if you take it from that point of view.
And if you do it in community.
Oh yeah.
Which is the only way we're going to survive. If you're building,
we all have to
building the connections we need.
Well, there's one thing about this though. I want to mention this. A lot of people think we all have to be involved, but the fact is we don't all have to be involved. We don't even think of it this way. More than half the people in the United States probably worry about climate change. But if everybody who worried about climate change cut his carbon emissions by half, which is a very doable thing, it would cut the use of fossil fuels by a quarter. Now think about this. The natural gas industry is not in good shape, despite all you hear about the wonderful things that we have from fracking. In fact, there was a guy who was a CEO of a fracking company who went to the Petroleum Institute and for their convention and said fracking is probably one of the worst investments you can get to. People who invest in fracking almost always lose all their money.
But one of the things that's happening is the projected response or projected output from these fracking operations is falling far short of what they anticipated.
But the other thing is the coal industry is down, the oil industry is, they're all operating on margins. And if you reduce their sales by 25%, they're going to be losing money. So what are they going to...
Economics, isn't it?
Yes, economics.
Well, I think also this could be an opportunity to jump in and talk a little bit about the 4 Rs, maybe if we have time. But
Good idea.
I think that I agree. And another one of kind of the core beliefs of 350 Vermont and lots of other folks in the movement is that this can't just be about individuals making change. And even though you're talking about some, larger number of individuals, which adds up, and those actions do matter, and I do believe that personal choices matter, individual change is not where the shift needs to happen. So it's more, so the changes that we're talking about are systemic changes, really, really big, wide-scale change. And so that kind of system or systemic change has to come from a much broader collective and like political and on every level. So economic, political, collective, community-based change, as opposed to isolating us as like individuals who make consumer choices. Because I think that's also one of the, again, it's like you can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. It's a similar idea that the kinds of changes that are needed are sweeping. So
like we can all change our light bulbs, but as long as our government is subsidizing oil companies, we're not going to.
I think that's
right.
absolutely
and as long as like
we're on.
those, the top, there's been a lot of news recently about the top polluting corporations, some of which pollute as much as countries. And so it's like, and there were some statistics that came out at this coal facility in Bow, like your individual choices are, make this amount of difference as opposed to this coal facility burning coal for 1 hour. It's like however many years of changes in your lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And so we use this model called the 4 Rs, which is a way of looking at system change and how system change happens and how each of these it's usually, I should have included a graphic, but it's usually a circle with 4 sort of quadrants or parts of the circle, and each of those 4 Rs is given equal weight in terms of all of them being necessary to bring about system change. So they stand for reform, which is changing the current system. So that looks like legislative changes, going to the State House and lobbying and pushing for changes that, legislative at the state level, or going to the select board and pushing for local change here in Brattleboro, mm-hmm. or, going to the local school board and pushing for, so that's like reform. Speaking of which, Tuesday, November 19th, you can save the date for a conversation with the Climate Solutions Caucus and representatives from here in Windham County, state representatives that will be listening to concerns from Windham County voters, and that's happening at 7 p.m. at St. Michael's Episcopal Church in Brattleboro, Tuesday, November 19th at 7. So that's reform. And then another R is resist, which is like, okay, the system is broken. We're all going to agree on that here. We all agree that systems change is needed, but I'm not just going to go and legally ask for changes to be made. I'm going to try to stop the system and stop business as usual and resist it with civil disobedience or nonviolent direct action, like here in Bow, or like the die-in that happened at the Heifer Stroll. It was youth-led last June, where the parade stopped, or like the climate strike rally on September 20th, where parts of downtown were shut down because we had 1,000 people on the streets. And just saying that we can't just keep doing this by following the rules. We have to actually break some of the rules in order to get the attention needed to have this upswell and uprising.
You could do it with art.
And art, totally.
When Vermont Yankee was going, I had an idea that it would be just enormous fun to take a big, huge pot of glue and a carload of shoes and go up Main Street in the middle of the night, gluing the shoes to the street. Right down the median line.
Yeah. Well, Extinction Rebellion has been in the news a lot recently for very theatrical, artistic, eye-catching
So if we wake up one
actions.
morning and there's shoes,
We'll
we
know
know
why.
who to,
Is that you?
we know who to question.
Yeah, I mean, it's really powerful. Art is definitely, art, theater, performance. Another R is reimagine. So, and it's kind of like getting out of these mindsets that we're so, I almost want to say, like, we're trapped in, really. So reimagining is like just getting out of that.
People
Like,
don't
let
realize.
it walk to work.
Yeah.
People don't realize. They really don't.
Totally. So like we need some people who are just like dreaming and writing visionary science fiction or visionary fiction that's really like imagining a new world, because you can't be what you can't see. You can't bring it into action if you can't even imagine it. So reimagining.
I shouldn't get up really, but I have a bag full of books over there, and one of them is called the Notes from the American Association for Prevention of Cruelty to Wee Folk, and it's about fairies and leprechauns and stuff like that. And it's exactly what you're talking about, is imagining something different.
Yeah.
And it's really fun. That my daughter and I did this together, and
Oh, awesome. Well, you can show us after. If
I'll
you don't
show
get
you
up now,
after,
that'd
yeah.
be great. So reimagining is like the dreamers, the writers, the songwriters, the people who really like thinking outside of the box and kind
the
of scheming
scientists
and
who are kind of like, whoa, like what if we tried this thing?
oh yeah, absolutely.
yeah. And then the
Absolutely.
recreators, the last R is recreate. And so they're, and all of these, it's not like you have to just be one or the other. Lots of people are many, but the recreators really in close conversation with the reimaginers, or maybe they're the same person, but it's like bringing those dreams and visionings and imaginings to life. And some of the examples that we've used in Brattleboro range from Brattleboro Time Trade, which is where I know Tom from.
Yes.
So this is, exchanging services for time instead of money. So instead of hiring someone to do something, you work out an exchange where Tom is really well known for helping people like fix all sorts of electrical things in their house or appliances, and he'll do that for time, and then he can use his time to get his dog walked or cared for when he can't, and then I can use my
And
time.
it doesn't have to be the same
And
person.
it doesn't have to be the same person, right, exactly. So you have like a bank account of hours, and then you can use it to exchange with anyone in the system. So it's just like removing yourself from this capitalist system of money in the bank, and thinking of it more in terms of time, and everyone's time is valued the same. We also use the Rich Earth Institute as an example,
Yes.
which is
People
pea
should learn
cycling.
about that.
So pea cycling here in Brattleboro, and it's like on the, it's like the cutting edge around the world, really. And it's here in Brattleboro, and you can donate. They're always looking for donors, not financially necessarily, although they'll take that too, but urine donors. So you can collect pee in your home, and then they will use it to fertilize local hayfields, and they're also part of ongoing scientific research to figure out how this can be used at like municipal and levels, and larger than just individual households. And so, and Edible Brattleboro also, where it's turning like lawns and otherwise like unused areas of town greens and turning them into gardens, and those gardens grow food, and then the food is available to all people.
So people
pick
can
them
walk
and-
down the street, notice that there's a good-looking tomato there,
Right.
take it,
and take
eat
it. Yeah, and there are gardens outside the co-op, outside Turning Point, and a few other locations around Brattleboro. And then they also host like farmers market stands, basically, but they're called Share the Harvest, and it's all for free. So they're not, and so just like shifting our relationship to food and who has access to food, and our relationship to land, and what, like, why do we have lawns? And how can we make something new and different,
Yeah.
or old?
Yeah.
And so 350 Vermont is really into these 4 R's, and 350.org is as well, kind of our affiliated larger organization, in that climate change is a systemic problem, so we need systemic solutions. And so we need people working on every single one of those 4 R's: reforming, resisting, reimagining, and recreating. And we need all 4 of them to be in conversation with each other, and people are drawn to different elements.
Seed
so we
saving
want
is a
people,
good example of
seed
that kind
saving
of
is
thing.
a great recreating thing.
Yeah.
But just that people can be drawn to different things in there, but we just really want people to take action in some way and know that that's part of a global response to our global crisis.
We have had so much fun in the last 15 years when I've been living in Brattleboro, growing things. And the property is very small, but now it's got 2 greenhouses on it. And one of the greenhouses has got probably 800 gallons of water in it that have fish swimming around, and they're there year round. The top of the tank freezes over, but the fish are fine. And we have fruit trees, some of them planted in the ground, some of them in pots. I don't even know how many citrus trees we've got. I know we've got lemons, limes, 4 different kinds of limes, oranges.
In the greenhouses?
No, the pots move to the driveway during the summer. Then they can go into the greenhouse during the spring and fall, but not necessarily. This fall they were out up until yesterday, and then they got moved to a sunroom, and they stay inside. And it's like some of the trees people can grow. Calamondins, which most people don't even know about. They're a cross between oranges and kumquats. They're little things, and they're very tart.
Yeah.
But you can make the most wonderful marmalade out of them. And a lot of people who like to eat kumquats would probably like these things. And we had a tree that was just about 4 feet tall in a pot, had probably 250 fruit on it last year. The things are just unbelievable. It's too tired to make fruit this year, but
It worked too hard last year.
it worked too hard last year. But figs, we've got a bunch of fig trees and olive trees and all of this. Pawpaws, that's another one. Pawpaws are coming up volunteering in Brattleboro. We've got volunteer peaches, by the way. These volunteer peaches came up next to the street. And, I don't know how many, I would say a peck of peaches came in from that thing this year. And these are trees that, peaches would have been pretty marginal when I was a kid, and pawpaws would have been utterly impossible. Climate change has brought us those.
Yeah, and we talked about that too in our workshop. I mean, not all of the impacts of climate change are bad, and definitely not for all people. But in some cases, there are some ways in which the growing season may be extended, or new, plants that weren't able to grow anymore are able to grow. And so our ability to adapt is also.
But the problem with that is that in some ways that could be great here. It can be a longer growing season here, but we know we don't exist in a vacuum. That means that in South Carolina, actually, their growing season is getting shorter because it's gotten too hot there, let alone in Mexico.
And sometimes it's like rain, heavy rains will impact it, or frost will, like a random frost will still hit, or a random thaw, or like the quick, so it's not, it's definitely not all good.
Our sugar season.
Our sugar season is sugaring up until the last year or two, I understand, but sugaring has been just going downhill for 30 years. And one of the things that I tell people, okay, climate change. When I was a kid, just across the river, 7 miles from here, we had so many mosquitoes you couldn't go outside without having 6 or 8 of them around. Really. I mean, this is just the way it was. When I was a kid, I remember going out of my grandmother's kitchen door and seeing 3 long lines of telephone poles where the lines were completely covered with resting swallows. And they were sitting about 5 inches apart. Same door, 20 some odd years later, my daughter came in and said, "You got to come out and see all the birds." First line was empty. The second line was half full. The third line was empty. And when I left that house 15 years ago, there were no swallows left. The mosquitoes were gone. Good thing, unless you happen to be a swallow, or unless you're worried about ticks. I mean,
most are now.
Some things are good, some things are bad, some things are really mixed blessings. And honestly, I think for every blessing you get out of climate change, you probably get about 5 or 6 things that are not good. Do you know about moose? And the moose are being killed by ticks?
Yeah, there was just some new research out of UVM, I think, that I need to look it up now, but it was like fungal related, that potentially something that could help the moose population. But
we had this really wonderful action this spring that was called the Next Steps Climate Walk. It was a 5-day walk from Middlebury to Montpelier, and it ended in Montpelier during the legislative session in the spring, with a really beautiful action trying to push them to pass legislation to ban all new fossil fuel infrastructure in the state. And kind of what made the event so beautiful was that there was a group of youth, high school, was there a middle schooler or two? I think mostly high school aged and college aged folks who over the last day or two had been kind of like writing these little notes about why they wanted their legislators to pass this bill, and what are they worried they're going to lose, and what do they want to do it, what are they doing this work in honor of. And they wrote the most beautiful notes saying like please save our sugar industry, pass this bill. Like, I'm worried I won't be able to have children. Please pass this bill. And really kind of expressing the fears and the love that they're doing this work out of. Mm-hmm. And we had probably 300 folks or so come into the State House singing, and then got silent while the youth read their notes out loud. But the things that they're worried are going to be lost. And there's so much from our childhoods that we're already seeing being impacted so much right now, and they're really going to see it. And so just really remembering that some of these things, this is the driving engine of why so many of us do the work.
You remind me of living in a town where the first year I was there, all of the maple trees changed color simultaneously, and the sun came out and hit these things, and they were bright gold. And that's something that we're probably going to lose, because the forests are in that much trouble that what's left that's unthreatened so far is probably hickory and oak. And even the pine trees, are in trouble. And I was looking at conifers, and you've got hemlock adelgids, and then you've got what's the other adelgid?
Woolly adelgid.
There's the hemlock woolly adelgid, but there's also a balsam woolly adelgid. And between the two of those, every conifer in Vermont, except for pines, is threatened. Now we've got a fungus that threatens the pines. And all of these things are brought in by climate change. And
emerald ash borer also.
And what?
The emerald ash borer.
All of everything. Every tree we've got, except for oaks and hickories, is being threatened by something. We've got, and that includes the trees that we plant in our orchards, the apple trees and whatever. We've got problems with everything. And that's where we're going to be with a lot of other things as well. We're going to have to change our agriculture. We're going to have to, unless somebody can figure out how to address this. And, we've got youth who are pretty motivated at this point. And I would not want to be a politician on the wrong side of that argument.
Yeah. And I don't know where we are in terms of time, but just...
we could ask Austin...
You're about an hour 20.
Oh, wow.
All right,
okay. So we can wrap up. I'm going to have to leave, but I thought maybe end on more of a hopeful note, is that, I think climate despair is real, and a lot of people, acknowledge what's happening, but feel like it's too late. So what's the point to do anything? And so another thing I think that's that Sonia and I tried to talk about in a workshop was the difference between 1 or even 2 degrees of warming versus 4, 5, 6 degrees of warming. These are really big, dramatic, kind of mind-boggling differences. And so it's not, so we're really not talking about how can we stop climate change, but it's just how can we make how can we try to reduce the impacts or lessen the impacts and lessen the it's like harm reduction. In a way, it's like a form of harm reduction. And so trying to feel like what you do does, and both like individually, but like we were saying, collectively, and then politically, and changing like corporate behavior, that difference between 1 or 2 degrees and a lot more is so big.
Huge.
And so really
Absolutely
like kind
huge.
of making sure that that is really clear, and that people also sometimes say, like, we're just Vermont, we're a small state, what does it matter, like the whole world. But first of all, Vermont, I just saw a meme that I should probably double check, but I'm gonna say that Vermont as a small state in the United States still has higher emissions than lots of places around the world.
Yes, it's true. Absolutely.
So even Vermont,
and Vermont can lead.
and Vermont has led before,
But also,
often
our
before.
emissions are going up.
Yes,
It's
and
not-
these
yeah.
are
We're
these
not-
are all
not
things
on
we
the-
have.
So we're not
Yeah.
leading yet, but we could be a leader. And some, we like the first state to pass civil unions, and ways in which like we've led in other cases that then went around the country. And so it could be an opportunity to really lead. And Brattleboro could also be a leader.
Brattleboro could be a leader.
For Vermont.
Brattleboro
so
should be a leader.
could lead for Vermont.
Really.
Vermont could lead for the country. We could.
Did you know, by the
rippling
way,
out.
that there was a hurricane that hit Israel?
Wow.
No.
Look up Medicane
Mm.
online. It hit about 6 days ago. And
First time ever, right?
Yeah,
First
it's a
time.
weird place for a hurricane.
the history of that part of the world is so old,
Mm.
and they've never had this happen before. I mean,
Yeah.
we could put this into a biblical
Yeah.
type of
Yeah.
thing if we wanted to. And
yeah.
hurricanes have started hitting Ireland.
Well, we're getting into
Yeah,
plague,
it's real. I know.
plagues
So,
season here.
So yeah, again, wrapping up on maybe a hopeful note is this idea. Joanna Macy is one of the people that's talked about active hope. It's not just like sitting at home and feeling hopeful that like someone else is gonna save the day or make the changes, or even being like, oh, okay, the youth, they're mobilized, let them do it, they're gonna solve all our problems. But active hope is really like taking that hope and internalizing it into action, and that by taking action, that's
One of
a
the
way
4 Rs.
to, it's like one of the ways
Pick one
to really
and do it.
to-
Whatever
exactly.
one floats your boat, just do some kind of action and do it with your neighbors, do it with your community.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming in. And thank you to the audience for watching. And we want you all to have a perfectly lovely week.
Yeah, thanks for watching, and plug in. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us online, 350vermont.org. And you can also contact us at Brattleboro at 350vt.org, or reach out to either me or Sonia personally.
Right. Very good.